We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us. 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 today. Shortly, we'll go live to the House of Commons to bring you, we hope, the Secretary of State for Housing, Michael Gove's update on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But we'll also look at some of the other big stories of the day, including how many mansions in London are owned by Russian oligarchs with ties to Putin, and might it really be possible not just to seize those properties, but to turn them into hostels for homeless Ukrainian refugees? We'll sum up the latest developments from Ukraine and beyond in the company of Robert Fox. Also, the animal rights charity that says it's time to ban dog shows. Is it possible to be both an animal lover and someone who actually owns a dog? We'll debate that. And a prescription for procrastination. A doctor explains how science can help you do today what shouldn't be put off until tomorrow. Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, the commentator Scarlett Maguire. But first, the headlines with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 4:01. Here are the top stories in the GB newsroom. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia will resume tomorrow following negotiations today. Ukraine is calling for a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops. It says Russian forces continue their bombardment of suburbs in Kiev. One person was killed when a shell hit an apartment block, and a second person died after being struck by falling debris in another area of the city. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal is calling on the European Council to kick Russia out.
We demand that a decision is approved to immediately oust Russia from the Council of Europe. The ones who definitely support this non-provoked and unjustified aggression cannot stay in the single European family where human life is the highest value.
A minute's silence has been held for Ukraine at the Council of Europe in France, which gathered in a special session to talk about the invasion. It's as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky released a statement this afternoon saying Russia has been planning the invasion for some time.
But we have no right to relax. The Russian state has been preparing for this war for tens of years. They have built up huge military resources for the sake of evil, in order to uproot the neighbours, in order to destroy Ukraine, Europe as we know it and value.
Well, Russia has denied claims it asked China for military equipment to use in its invasion of Ukraine. It says a number of unnamed US officials told multiple news organisations that Moscow has sought assistance from Beijing. The Chinese embassy in the US says it wasn't aware of the request. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned China it would face consequences if it helped Russia. Director of the China Institute at SOAS University, Professor Steve Tsang, told GB News the Chinese president is likely to prioritise his political ambitions over helping Russia.
And the most important and basic interest of China for 2022 is for Xi Jinping to succeed himself into a third term of office. And he wouldn't want to take risk of attracting American secondary sanctions. So it is not because of American persuasion, it is because of domestic and personal political calculations.
More than 2.6 million refugees have now fled Ukraine. The EU foreign policy chief says the number could swell to 4 to 5 million as the invasion continues. It comes as the government's Homes for Ukraine scheme, which will allow people in the UK to offer spare rooms to Ukrainians fleeing the conflict, starts today. Those opening their homes for at least 6 months will be offered £350 a month. Police have entered the mansion of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska after protesters were seen inside earlier today. At least 11 police vehicles are on the scene in central London, along with dozens of officers. Mr. Deripaska is one of the 7 Russian oligarchs who was sanctioned last week by the government. He has business empires, wealth and connections closely associated with the Kremlin. Downing Street says Chelsea football fans must stop chanting Roman Abramovich's name at matches. Football fans again expressed support for the Russian owner of the club during their home match against Newcastle. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says it is completely inappropriate behaviour. Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the British government over his links to President Putin. Boris Johnson says the UK will supply Ukraine with more than 500 portable generators. It follows a request by the country's President Zelensky. The devices will provide energy for essential services, including at hospitals and shelters, and will power 20,000 homes. Australia and the Netherlands have launched joint legal action against Russia over the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 8 years ago. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said Moscow was responsible under international law for the attack, which resulted in the deaths of 298 passengers. The Dutch government said in a statement the UN Security Council had also been informed of the legal action. The Queen has praised the Commonwealth as a force for good during what she refers to as a testing times, as she misses the annual Commonwealth service. Prince Charles represented her at Westminster Abbey. Other senior royals and politicians also attended. In her message to the organisation of 54 countries, she says the family of nations continues to be a point of cooperation and friendship. The monarch also repeated the lifelong commitment she made in 1947 to devote her life in service. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
Take you straight live to the House of Commons. The Secretary of State for Housing, Michael Gove, is just on his feet.
Their courage under fire and their determination to resist inspires our total admiration. The United Kingdom stands with the Ukrainian people. My right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has been in the vanguard of those providing military assistance. The Foreign Secretary has been coordinating diplomatic support and, with the Chancellor and the Business Secretary, implementing a new tougher-than-ever sanctions regime. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Home Office have also been providing humanitarian support on the ground to Ukraine's neighbours, helping them to cope with the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. But more can and must be done. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already expanded the family route. She has also confirmed that from tomorrow, Ukrainians with passports will be able to apply for UK visas entirely online, without having to visit visa application centres. As a result, the number of Ukrainians now arriving in this country is rapidly increasing, and numbers will grow even faster from tomorrow. We also know, however, that the unfailingly compassionate British public want to help further, which is why, Mr. Speaker, today we are answering that call with the announcement of a new sponsorship scheme, Homes for Ukraine. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, officials in the Home Office, in my own department and across government for their work over the course of the last days and weeks in order to ensure that we can stand up the scheme as quickly as possible. And in particular, I would like to thank my honourable friend, Richard Harrington, now Lord Harrington of Watford. His experience in ensuring that the Syrian refugee resettlement programme was a success will prove invaluable in making sure that we do right by the people of Ukraine. The scheme that he has helped us to design draws on the enormous goodwill and generosity of the British public and our proud history of supporting the vulnerable in their hour of greatest need. The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. The scheme will be open to all Ukrainian nationals and residents. They will be able to live and work in the United Kingdom for up to 3 years. They will have full and unrestricted access to benefits, healthcare, employment and other support. Sponsors in the UK can be of any nationality with any immigration status, provided they have at least 6 months leave to remain within the UK. Sponsors will have to provide accommodation for a minimum of 6 months, and in recognition of their generosity, the government will provide a monthly payment of £350 to sponsors for each family whom they look after. These payments will be tax-free, they will not affect benefit entitlement nor council tax status. Ukrainians arriving in the United Kingdom will also have access to the full range of public services, doctors, schools and full local authority support. Of course, we want to minimise bureaucracy and make the process as straightforward as possible, while also doing everything we can to ensure the safety of all involved. Sponsors will therefore be required to undergo necessary vetting checks, and we're also streamlining processes to security assess the status of all Ukrainians who will be arriving in the United Kingdom. From today, anyone who wishes to record their interest in sponsorship can do so on gov.uk, and the webpage has gone live as I speak. We will then send any individual who registers further information setting out the next steps in this process. We'll outline what is required of a sponsor, and we will set out how sponsors can identify a named Ukrainian individual or family who can then take up each sponsorship offer. Because we want the scheme to be up and running as soon as possible, Homes for Ukraine will initially facilitate sponsorship between people with known connections. But we will rapidly expand the scheme in a phased way with charities, churches and community groups to ensure that many more prospective sponsors can be matched with Ukrainians who need help. And we are, of course, also working closely with the devolved administrations to make sure that their kind offers of help are also mobilised. I know that all concerned want to play their part in supporting Ukrainians who've been through so much to ensure they feel at home in the United Kingdom, and I'm committed to working with everyone of goodwill to achieve this. Mr. Speaker, our country has a long and proud history of supporting the most vulnerable during their darkest hours. We took in refugees fleeing Hitler's Germany, those fleeing repression in Idi Amin's Uganda, and of course those who fled the atrocities of the Balkan Wars. More recently, we've offered support to those fleeing persecution in Syria, Afghanistan and Hong Kong, and we're doing so again with Homes for Ukraine. We're a proud democracy. All of us in this House wish to see us defend and uphold our values, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies, and to offer a safe haven to people who have been forced to flee war and persecution. The British people have already opened their hearts in so many ways, and are hopeful that many will also be ready to open their homes and to help those fleeing persecution find peace, healing and the prospect of a brighter future. And that is why I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy.
Mr. Speaker, we were so relieved to hear the Secretary of State was going to announce a scheme to allow Ukrainian refugees a route to safety after weeks of delay. But a press release is not a plan. and we are really deeply concerned about the lack of urgency. He went on TV yesterday to claim that Ukrainians could be here by Sunday, but he's just told us that they will still need a visa under the current application process. These are 50-page forms that have to be completed online, asking people who have fled with nothing to find an internet cafe to upload documents they don't have, water bills, mortgage documents to prove who they are. The Home Office has been incredibly slow in issuing these visas. As of this morning, only 4,000 have been issued. We are lagging way behind the generosity of other countries. We could simplify this process today. We could keep essential checks, but drop the excessive bureaucracy. He knows it. Why hasn't it been done? For weeks, the British people have been coming forward in large numbers to offer help. It's been moving, heartwarming to see the decency and spirit on display in every corner of this country. But can he clarify what exactly the government will be doing, especially in relation to matching families to sponsors? Because on his tour of the TV studios, he suggested several times that people who are willing to sponsor a Ukrainian family need to come to the government with the name of that family, who will then rubber stamp it. He can't seriously be asking Ukrainian families who are fleeing Vladimir Putin, who've left their homes with nothing, to get onto Instagram and advertise themselves in the hope that a British family might notice them. Is this genuinely the extent of this scheme? Surely there's a role for the Secretary of State in matching Ukrainian families to their sponsors, not just a DIY asylum scheme where all he does is take the credit. Can he please clarify what the government's role is going to be? There's been a lack of urgency to get people here, and there's still a lack of urgency to ensure we support them when they do. My honourable friend and I spoke with council leaders earlier today. They stand ready and willing to help. Why hasn't anyone from his department picked the phone up to them? I spoke to charities last week who he will ask to act as sponsors. They are acutely aware that the people who are coming will be quite unlike previous refugees. 2 million people are on the march, children alone, mums with very young kids, older people. The brutal reality of what's happening in Ukraine is that working age people have stayed behind to fight. Now, they will have healthcare needs, they'll need school places, maternity care, social care. One council leader told me today that his city, which traditionally plays a major role in welcoming refugees, has only 9 secondary school places available. Has it not occurred to him until this point to pick up the phone to leaders like him before he went into the TV studios and promised the earth? These charities and council leaders are the same people who stepped up during COVID. They spin gold out of thread every single day, and what is keeping them awake at night right now is how we do right by people and keep them safe. It was only a few months ago that the Home Office placed a child into a hotel in Sheffield that they had been told was unsafe, without even bothering to tell the council, and he fell out of a window and died. Will he ensure that every council is contacted by close of play today? Will he work with them to do the vetting checks that are needed? They're experts in safeguarding children. Will he not just trust them, but support them? Will he put a safety net in place in case a placement breaks down? His department over the weekend confirmed that families who are left homeless in that situation will not be able to claim for housing costs under universal credit. Surely that can't be true. Surely we are not going to ask people who fled bombs and bullets to lie homeless on the streets of Britain. I suspect, Mr. Speaker, he has felt as ashamed as I have to watch how this government has closed the door to people who need our help. People have been, he shakes his head, people have been turned back at Calais. They've been left freezing by the roadside with their children. We've had planes leaving neighbouring NATO countries packed to the rafters, except those to London, because this government has turned people away. The British people who've come forward have shown that we are a far better country than their government. But unless he gets a plan together, a real plan, not just a press release, all he is effectively announcing is plans to fail the people of Ukraine twice over. He said today that they have our total admiration, and they do. But they need more than that. They need our total support.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her questions and what I think was her support for our scheme. The Honourable Lady asked about the visa application process and the length and the bureaucracy associated with it. Well, as was announced last week in the House of Commons by the Home Secretary, and as I repeated today, it is the case that for Ukrainians who have a valid passport, it will be the case that they can be have their application turned round within 24 hours, not in the way to which you referred. That was announced last week. It is time that instead of manufacturing synthetic outrage, she actually kept up with what government, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is delivering. She asked about matching. She's already had a go. She asked about matching families and sponsors. We are moving as quickly as possible in order to ensure, working with NGOs and local government, that individuals in need can be found, the families and the sponsors whom they need, in order to get people into this country as quickly as possible. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for speaking to people in local government this morning. I was speaking to people in local government 10 days ago in order to ensure that this scheme was capable of being delivered. She asks why it is that we are requiring matching in the way that we are. It's because our scheme has been developed in partnership with non-governmental organisations who have welcomed our approach. We've been doing the practical work of ensuring that refugee organisations on the ground can help to shape our response in order to help those most in need. Now, I know that the Honourable Lady wants to help. I believe that everyone in this House wants to ensure that the scheme is successful. So she makes a number of valid points about the need for school places. That is why there is additional funding available to every local authority that will take refugees in order to ensure that school places are provided. She asks about wraparound care. We're providing additional funding to local government in order to ensure that the expertise required in order to provide those who've been traumatised with the support they need will also be there. She asks about the rapidity with which vetting checks, but also the comprehensive nature of those vetting checks, can be guaranteed. We've been working with the Home Office in order to streamline that process so it is quickly as possible, but also to ensure, as she quite rightly pointed out, that we do not place vulnerable children in accommodation where they might be at risk. In all of these cases, every single one of the points that she has made has been addressed by officials, NGOs and those in local government in order to make sure that our scheme works. It now falls to the Honourable Lady, her questions having been answered, to get behind this scheme, to support those open-hearted British people who want to ensure that we can do everything possible in order to help those in need. It is time to rise above partisan politics and to recognise that this is a united effort in which our colleagues in devolved administrations and those in NGOs are working with the government to put humanity first.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has generated a great deal of progress in the last few days, but he'll understand that we still have a very long way to go.
We wanted to bring you some of the back and forth there because you'll have listened to some of these exchanges between Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up, and Michael Gove, who's proposing that scheme, Homes for Ukraine. Michael Gove says Lisa Nandy was guilty of manufacturing synthetic outrage and said actually a scheme like this, if it's to work properly, is going to take time to construct properly. You don't want to place vulnerable people with people who haven't been vetted properly, he said there in response to part of what she had to say. She made the point that a press release is not the same thing as a comprehensive plan and criticised the government for what she described its lack of urgency right now. We'll keep across what else has been said in the House of Commons, but you've got the bones of it there, we think, most of the important stuff. Here in the studio with me, Scarlett Maguire and Robert Fox, who we booked to talk about the sort of the situation on the ground militarily, but I wonder if you might offer us a view on this one, and in particular an idea that actually, if you are going to put something in place for lots and lots and lots of people, the delivery takes time, doesn't it? That sounds like I'm being sympathetic to the government, but it's not always easy to make these things work really quickly, is it?
How many is lots and lots? You see, I think that Lisa Nandy has got a point. This is very cumbersome. They've changed, they've tacked, they've weaved an awful lot. And there's an awful lot of bureaucracy there, and there's an awful lot of agency. Always the magic word, local government officials, NGOs, and a hell of a lot falls on the shoulders of the NGOs. The figures are 4,000. The prospect is that between Czech Republic, Poland and Moldova, they'll have probably within a week of now altogether about 4 million. And this is absolutely nothing. And this is where one would have liked a little bit more of a comprehensive approach. One of the things that the UK should do as a partner, and we don't want to bring in the Euro word, but Poland needs desperate help at the moment. We should be putting money behind people, unfortunately, who have got to set up refugee camps. Sadly, we would have thought about refugee camps as things we saw in Bosnia, possibly Kosovo in 1999, and obviously in Syria. But the Poles have done terrifically well up to now, but they really need help. Otherwise, we're going to see mass tragedy. Because, again, I don't want to say, it was 2-0 to the opposition, but Lisa Nandy had a point. It's going to be cumbersome. It's going to take time. If you have things like 50-page documents, I don't know whether they do or not, given the circumstances with the Ukrainians that I'm in touch with in Ukraine, it's a very, very big ask.
Scott Maguire, you're going to be with us for the next couple of hours. But just on the point about how urgent our response could have been, should we have been chartering planes to fly to Warsaw, to bring people back, to put into camps? I mean, is that what...
I think Robert was talking about camps in Poland rather than in Britain.
No, we've got all those houses of the oligarchs. Yes. We could put them in.
We're going to come on to that, actually.
I mean, what's so interesting, actually, is that the British people are way ahead of the politicians. I mean, this whole thing is that they were worried that actually we wouldn't want refugees, that there was, like, the problem with the Syrians.
They're fighting another political campaign.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason they've brought in the whole so-called plan, press release, is because it was the people who said, yes, this is what we want. We've known that this could be happening since, what was it, October, November, right? We've seen it. We then suddenly saw the troops come in, but even before then, people were frightened. Of course, we should have had a plan, because the other thing about this is it does show the fact that Michael Gove has taken it over.
Scarlett, we didn't have a plan for COVID.
We haven't had a plan for anything. Just don't even talk to me. Every time the government says, we've got this, you look at
this Rolls-Royce civil service that everybody talks about.
Yes.
Let's just...
It is a problem. And we're seeing yet another problem. I couldn't agree more with
We're going to come back to this before Robert goes. He's got a lot more to say on a lot of different subjects. But let's just turn to Steve Valdez-Simons, who's the Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International UK. Steve, thank you for your time. What did you make of what Michael Gove had to say? I mean, assuming it all works, there is a generosity to this programme. The money's there. £10,500 would go to councils. £350 tax-free a month goes to individual households. The individuals, well, they can work, they can claim benefits. If a place can be found, their children can go to school. This is quite generous.
I think it's an extremely modest approach to an absolute emergency happening at the borders of Europe, as indeed your commentators just then have described. We know that the only similar scheme we can point to that the government has tried in recent years has been that for Syrians. A few hundred people were supported through that scheme in the end. We may see much the same. I know that there is more support this time round, and maybe when they finally get round to working out how this bureaucracy that will be needed for it is going to function, perhaps it will do better. But the reality, and in fact the elephant in the room really, is this government has crashed our asylum system. It has built backlogs and costs, which evidently the Home Office is struggling with. And it's the same department that's going to have to deal with the sponsorship applications on this side and the marry-up applications on the other side of the Ukrainians that people want to help.
Okay.
And meanwhile, all the countries, just this final point, please, all the countries of our former partnership in the EU, what have they done? They've simply waived visas and invited Ukrainians to find refuge in their territory. We haven't done that.
Steve, if you can just hold on, I'm just going to expand this out because we've got Robert Fox and Scarlett Maguire here who've got strong opinions on this subject. I mean, on that final point that Steve Valdez-Simons made there, Robert Fox, that those neighbouring countries have opened, very quickly opened up their borders. I mean, to some degree, they've got, if you're Moldova, you've probably got a less evolved immigration system. But also, I heard somebody today, if at all, but, you know, I heard somebody today criticising the British government for taking fewer refugees than the Moldovans. And the Moldovans have got a state that's creaking, to put it kindly. But it's a neighbouring state.
Let's talk.
No, hang on. So Robert Fox first.
Yeah, but that's very little England, if I can say so, and it actually doesn't.
No, it's practical.
It doesn't.
Moldova's a neighbouring state.
No.
We're 3,000
I'm going to make
miles
another
away.
point, which Michael has made. The waste of human capital. The Ukrainians that I'm in touch with have worked here, and they're very good, and they're very good value. And the idea to behave like Lady Bountiful with her trunk basket, going to see the peasants in their cottage, which is what you're hearing from the front bench, is absolutely, it is so wasteful. And Mike was absolutely right. It's such a waste of money. Steve, sorry, it was such a waste of money. It's a lot of money for a very, very meagre scheme, and we have been much more meagre. And can I briefly mention the defence thing? We're giving 500 generators. We've given 3,500 shoulder-launched anti-tank missiles. That's absolutely nothing. They were shot away in 2 days.
We're introducing another topic, which we'll come to in time. Scarlett Maguire, just on... We have a media culture in this country where if things go wrong, Michael Gove will get it in the neck subsequently. He made the point there that the checks aren't there to be dilatory or to be bureaucratic. They have a duty of care. And part of that duty of care is if you've got this Homes for Ukraine scheme and somebody comes and lives in that home, you want to be sure that the person who's hosting, on behalf of us, the British people, a Ukrainian refugee, isn't going to turn out to be an abuser, as could be the case. So we need to vet that. We also need to be sure that the people who are coming in as best we can and quickly are not going to be somebody who will do the host harm.
So I don't think most people are arguing about vetting. What most people are arguing about is actually how do the Ukrainians get in? I mean, we've seen on the television pictures of Ukrainian women, with children here, being turned away at Paris, at Calais, trying desperately to get in. And then we are lectured about, well, look, the Russians might be trying to sneak in as agents. Well, frankly, if that's what they're doing, they're not going to go in as part of the Ukraine thing. I mean, either we behave like other European countries, like Germany, like France, and say, fine, we will let you in, and then we will vet you. We will find out what's going on. I mean, the problem is, people wanting to get into Britain have been going from Paris to Lille to
Brussels.
I mean, it's just, and frankly, it's embarrassing. I mean, it is shameful. And that's why we've moved, because actually the British people have said it. And can I say that the fact that Michael Gove has done this shows what the Conservative government think of Priti Patel. I mean, she just didn't get her act together, right? So they have to get in somebody else to overrule the Home Office and their hostile environment.
She did very badly on the information game, Priti Patel. That's what we're really saying. And the excuse game, they're still playing catch-up on it.
Oh, let's just go back, if we can, if he's still there, to Steve Valdez-Simons from Amnesty. Steve, I hope you're still with us. We were starting to get into the politics of this to a degree, and the blame game, which I'm sure will ensue in time. Just to broaden this out to the sort of political ideology behind it, there are those, and I know you are one of those people who's been arguing that this makes us look afresh at our outlook towards refugees. Does it not tell us something else, which is the sort of open-hearted hospitality and desire to help that my two guests here have been describing? Reminds us that actually, yes, that the public were ahead of the government on this, but they were ahead of the government because they recognised people they had a sense of kinship with, who, if I can put it in quotes, had a legitimate reason to be fleeing for their lives. And there is a jaded quality to a lot of the conversation in the public square about economic migrants or refugees, because people have seen hundreds of thousands of people trying to come to the UK who are not always fleeing war.
Well, they haven't seen hundreds of thousands of people trying to come to the UK who have not been fleeing conflict and persecution. We don't receive hundreds of thousands of people in this country. and the great majority of the people who do make dangerous and unauthorized journeys, when their claims are dealt with, they are shown to be refugees. Doesn't mean everybody is, I accept that. But the reality, and the Home Office keeps denying this, but its own figures show it, that the great majority of the people that it finally gets round to processing their claims establish their refugee status. Yeah. And we know the British public is positive in the ways that you've said, not just to Ukrainians. There was a positive response in relation to Afghanistan. There was exactly the same in response to Syria. Many other crises and situations of conflict don't get the sort of attention of those areas, do they?
No, I would dispute that. I think certainly Afghanistan, there was a desire to help there. There was a sense that we had an obligation. I'm not so sure about Syria necessarily. I think people had misgivings over time about whether everybody who was, in quotes, a Syrian refugee actually was that. And just on the point about numbers, I think the truth is, I mean, you question my characterisation of hundreds of thousands. We don't know. We just don't know. I mean, if the number of people coming in boats over the English Channel last year was certainly in the high tens of thousands, and over the course of years, and I didn't mention a time frame, we may well be into hundreds of thousands, but the brute truth is we just don't know.
Well, again, with respect, we do know about the people who claim asylum because they come forward. They have to. That's what they do, and we shouldn't be deterring it.
The actual reasons they're here are often very different things. See, we're entering different territory, but we ventilated some of the important points that people are conjuring with right now, and we appreciate your time for thinking about them. And I think Robert Fox is going to be hanging around for a little bit longer. We've got some more to discuss. You've got more to get off your chest, and Scarlett's going to be here for the next hour or so. Now, where are we going next? We're going to bring you a news bulletin with Tamsin.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. It's 4:33. Well, peace talks between Ukraine and Russia will resume tomorrow after negotiations were held today. It's as Russian forces continue their bombardment, shelling suburbs in Kiev. They're pushing for a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops. At least 2 people have died and several others were injured following Russian missile attacks on the capital this morning. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky released a statement this afternoon saying Russia has been planning the invasion for some time.
But we have no right to relax. The Russian state has been preparing for this war for tens of years. They have built up huge military resources for the sake of evil, in order to uproot the neighbours, in order to destroy Ukraine, Europe as we know it and value.
More than 2.6 million refugees have now fled Ukraine, with the EU saying that number could swell to 4 to 5 million. It comes as the government's Homes for Ukraine scheme, which will allow people in the UK to offer spare rooms to Ukrainians fleeing the conflict, starts tomorrow. Those opening their homes for at least 6 months will be offered £350 a month. Police have entered a mansion believed to be owned by a Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, in central London after protesters were seen on the balcony of the property today. Mr. Deripaska is one of the 7 Russian oligarchs who were sanctioned last week by the government. He has business empires, wealth and connections closely associated with the Kremlin. The Queen has praised the Commonwealth as a force for good during what she refers to as testing times in a message sent as she misses the annual Commonwealth service. Prince Charles represented her at Westminster Abbey. Other senior royals and politicians also attended. The monarch also repeated the lifelong commitment she made in 1947 to devote her life in service. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Back to Brazier in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You'll have seen that announcement from Michael Gove a few moments ago, how the UK intends to increase its efforts to support Ukrainian refugees. He wants your help. If you're a homeowner, you'll be paid for it too. But one country that has been, in the eyes of many, a shining light in the crisis, that is Poland. Over 1.7 million people, and rising, have fled there since the beginning of the conflict. GB News reporter Paul Hawkins is in Poland on its border with Ukraine. Hi to you, Paul.
Yeah, hi Colin, that's right. Yeah, 1.77 million people, according to the Polish border guard, have now passed from Ukraine into Poland, and at least 1 million of them are remaining within the country. And that means that effectively Poland's population has increased by 2% in just over 2 weeks. So it's a big challenge for Poland. First of all, with the humanitarian efforts, people come across the border and then finding permanent and semi-permanent accommodation. Many people, though, choosing as well to travel to other countries that are further afield. We're just outside a Tesco's near the border, near the Medica border, that has been turned into a registration centre for Ukrainians that are coming across. And then from here, over there are loads of buses that are heading off to places in Europe, including Germany, which is where one person that we can speak to now is heading. Her name is Anastasia. Anastasia, thank you for speaking to us. First of all, just you're from Zhytomyr region in Ukraine, and just tell us about your journey from Zhytomyr region to here.
We came here, and now we will go to Warsaw, then we will go to Germany, and then we will go to Turkey. Like, this is our journey.
Yeah, why are you heading to Turkey?
My mom works there, and she decided to take me to her because it's really safety there, because the situation in Ukraine is really crazy, and she decided she wanted me to save.
Yeah, and just very quickly, what is it like in Zhytomyr at the moment?
At the moment, they fire our town really hard, and it's crazy. They just fired school that is in the center of town, and they kill a lot of people that are just usual people.
Yeah, but your friends and family that are still in Ukraine, they're safe.
Yes, they're safe, hopefully, and I hope they will continue to be like that. I just pray for them.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the UK are wondering how many Ukrainians will come over. 3,000 Ukrainians are heading to the UK at the moment. Have you thought at all about going to the UK?
I was thinking of it, but my mom works in Turkey, so I will go to her, and I won't choose the other country, so I will stay with my mom. But I think a lot of people can choose this country because it's safe there, and I think a lot of great people, they will help us.
Yeah. Have you spoken to any of your friends or family that would have they mentioned going to the UK?
Yes, one of my friends, he told that they were thinking of going to UK, but now they're in Czech Republic, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know, to be honest, if they will continue to go to UK.
Okay, it's interesting because they've changed the policy there, so you can now match up with a British family or a British individual and spend time there. You can work in the UK, you can get access to healthcare. Do you think that will encourage other Ukrainians to maybe want to go to the UK?
I think this will encourage the amount of people that will go there, because this is really great opportunities for us, and this is really great help, and it will maybe save us in our lives, and we'll get kind of new chance for new life and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it will. And do a lot of Ukrainians speak English, or not? Do you know?
Yes, and Ukrainian people really like speaking English, and a lot of them know it, and use it every day, because in Ukraine we have a lot of foreign people as well, so we use English language.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And you're waiting. How long until your bus goes?
I don't know. Maybe 20 minutes or 30.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll have to leave it there. But thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. There you go. That's the thoughts of Anastasia. She's thought about the UK. Might end up in the UK. Some of her friends and family are, but most people, it has to be said, Colin, are heading for other parts of Europe, and they want to remain as close as they can to Ukraine, which is understandable, because you want to remain as close as you can to your home country for when that conflict finishes. Of course, we don't know when that's going to be.
No, Paul, thanks very much indeed. Paul Hawkins there. Well, joining me in the studio still, we've got Scarlett Maguire who's going to be with us through until 6, but Robert Fox has got the meter running, so we'll turn to him before he goes. We've talked already this afternoon about the refugee situation, so let's just park that briefly and talk instead about the military situation in Ukraine. You're a defence editor. You've covered wars, numerous wars over the years. How's it going?
Very, very difficult to read. The Russians have no embeds with them. So we just get scattered propaganda. Things are not going to the script quite clearly, because they're attempting slowly to strangle the city. There's almost not one city, think even of the Mariupol and Kherson, where they're fully, totally, absolutely and pacifically in control. In Mariupol, as I was coming out this morning, the chief GRU man, that is defence spy chief, was shot dead. They're losing senior officers now. And the fascinating thing is that it's quality, in my appreciation, rather than quantity. I really can't see enough tanks going down roads. Actually, when you're doing urban warfare, you've got to cover the tanks with infantry. They are not committing the infantry. And that is proving, I suspect, a real problem, because the infantry is 60,
Is that because
40,
the infantry
50
doesn't want to go in?
Because they're conscripts, half of them at least. And you can't risk that. And that's why we're hearing they're bringing in Chechens. They brought in contractors from Wagner. You put them in, you put them out. Wagner's not nearly as good as it's painted to be. They do specialist things. The fear is that they may be forming into informal hit squads, assassination squads, to go behind, take out prominent people. But suddenly we hear the Russians don't deny this. They're trying to recruit 15,000 Syrians. They've offered them big money as far as Syria is concerned, because they're offering up to $3,000 a month. That's a lot. They're trying to press the militias from Belarus. And that's where we've got the first hints of mutinies, that they're throwing down uniforms. They're not prepared to cross the border. But we know there have been misgivings with the senior command. They've lost 3 generals. 2 of the 41st Shock Army, which is always the big army, which is opposite Kharkiv, and they seem to have been shot by Ukrainians, and 1 Chechen brigade commander. But then back home at the ranch, Sergei, and I'll always forget his surname, who is in charge of the FSB, the external equivalent of MI6, the equivalent of the old KGB, he's under house arrest by all accounts. 3 separate sources testify this. Sergei, you may remember, didn't get his lines right at that very staged Security Council meeting when he was asking all the Joes, yeah, we all believe in free Luhansk and Donetsk, we'll go in. But if you're losing in your intelligence services, and the intelligence services are the base of Putin power.
Robert, just a final thought. If this is mutiny, incipient mutiny, but we don't have a no-fly zone. We're going to be talking to Alistair Stewart a little later on, my GB News colleague, but who was in the first Gulf War, anchoring for ITN I think in Kuwait City, certainly. But then our aircraft were dropping leaflets encouraging Iraqis to be mutineers and to leave the army. Should we be considering something like that? PSYOPs, they call it, don't they? Black Ops.
Yeah, they did it. They did it again in 2003. They weren't terribly good, actually, by the way. I have to say that, and they didn't turn around. But I think we do have to understand the dynamic of what's going on, because there's no doubt about it. When you look at the balance of forces, the Ukrainians are up against it. But go back to my point about strangulation. They still, as far as I can make out, haven't fully encircled Kiev. They would probably need about 25,000 troops to do that before you begin the moving in. And there's one thing where they're not playing the Russian game. After the terrible incident at Irpin where a colleague was killed, the Ukrainians have banned media from going into the outer ring of the suburbs where the battleground will be, because A, they will be vulnerable, but B, I would have thought, my God, looking at the BBC, not GB News, I said some pictures that they were saying, and a dear old friend and colleague who should be nameless was giving away the positions. Oh, they're there. Oh, the tactic is to bury in the woods. God, if I was that company commander, I would have put him on a charge, at least. And they're getting very, very savvy. And I think this is Zelensky's people. There is a core, you see, in the Ukrainian army, which I think is very professional, and they have thought out very carefully how to do a stay-behind campaign. Now, the Russian thinking at the tactical level seems to me to be nowhere near so sophisticated, because they find it very difficult to work such large groups of forces together. We've hardly seen, per se, the Russian Air Force at all. Most of the bombing has been done by long-range missiles. So there's a lot to shake down, and time will tell, but it will tell within 10 days, a fortnight at the most, as to what we're in for. And finally, Putin gets into real trouble if he doesn't pitch it right with the spring call-up, because they're about to they do it every 6 months. The next big round of conscription is due to happen within a few weeks. And if the messages are getting out that things are not so good for Mr. Ivan, which is the equivalent of G.I. Joe and Tommy Atkins, but, you know, the good professional Russian soldier, there are some good professionals there, that they're not having such a good time, boy, I think you're going to have trouble with conscription.
Robert, I wonder if you're right. It'd be fascinating to see whether there is a mutiny brewing. Robert Fox, thanks ever so much for coming in. Scarlett, we'll get your opinions on Ukraine shortly, but we wanted to hear what Robert had to say before he goes and gets his taxi. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Or whatever other form of transport he's using, maybe walking. Coming up after the break, we are debating what's happening, or what was happening last week in Birmingham. It was Crufts, one of the biggest dog shows in the world, attended by many thousands of people. PETA, the animal rights group, says it shouldn't be happening. We'll debate that next.
Hello there. Most of us will have a dry night tonight, but it could turn a little misty. Certainly across the south, a few fog patches are likely, and like this morning, it'll be a little chilly first thing as well. Surrounded by weather fronts, but they're not really causing too much in the way of rainfall. This one has been making for a wet day across western Scotland, and it is continuing to push northwards and will bring some showery rain to northeast Scotland through this evening before fizzling away. Another weather front then will bring some rain later in the night over the Western Isles and parts of Northern Ireland, but bar the odd shower across the southeast, most other places looking dry and fine. But it will turn misty in the south with a few fog patches, and it will turn chilly with a touch of frost in rural spots. So a fresh start to Tuesday, but generally quite a sunny one, certainly for England and Wales. There will be a few thick fog patches which could linger through the morning rush hour before they eventually disappear. And we will see increasing cloud across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some rain just pushing into the west of Northern Ireland, across the Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles. But otherwise it's dry. Temperatures 9 or 10 across Scotland, Northern Ireland. But look at these numbers for England and Wales and the sunshine. 13, 14 in Birmingham, 15, possibly 16 in London. During Tuesday evening, the rain will continue to trickle south, so it will arrive in Belfast, Glasgow, and eventually some rain into Edinburgh as we head into Wednesday. Some uncertainty about exactly where this weather front's going to lie. It's joined by another one coming up across England and Wales, so a wetter day for the Midlands and eastern England on Wednesday with some heavy showers around, but it's still going to feel pretty warm, pretty humid, I would have thought as well. Temperatures easily up again into the teens. And with some sunshine, we could easily pop up to 16 or 17 degrees. Further west, not as warm, but generally a brighter day for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. A few showers on Thursday, but apart from that, as we head into Friday and the weekend, plenty of spring sunshine.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We're going to leave Ukraine behind. We're talking about this. Thousands of people were in Birmingham this weekend for the famous annual dog show, Crufts, a bit away from the pageantry and assault courses. The event was causing some controversy online as the animal rights group PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals is the acronym, launched a petition calling for the broadcaster, Channel 4, to stop airing the show. The group claims that the event is a, quote, pageant for unhealthy dogs who are often plagued by agonising hereditary diseases after generations of inbreeding, close quote. So for our debate this afternoon, we're asking, is Crufts effectively animal abuse? Joining me to debate this question, Jennifer White, from the campaign group PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And also we're joined by the animal welfare campaigner Debbie Matthews and friend. Thanks both of you for joining us. Debbie, let's start with you. Do you enjoy Crufts?
Well, I love it. I can see it as a celebration of dogs. All the things they can do. We were actually at Crufts. We were invited on to Crufts TV to talk about pet theft. And there are so many issues they cover. Medical detection dogs, therapy dogs. The fly ball is absolutely brilliant to watch. And really it's a beauty contest for dogs, but also it's about responsible breeders. It's about, and it does show up the things that are wrong as well. I absolutely agree that the bulldog wasn't the right dog. Sorry, Pepper's talking at the same time. The bulldog wasn't the best example of how a bulldog should be. But what this is doing is highlighted the fact that it's a dog that needs to be looked at and needs lots of things to be changed in the breed. And I think that highlights it for the Kennel Club, the breeders, which is really important. But also not everybody can adopt and shop. I've been turned down twice to get a rescue dog. The first time because I worked in the mornings, I couldn't get a dog. And the second time we wanted to get an ex-breeding bitch and we couldn't get one because we didn't already have a dog. So we went to get a dog, but we couldn't get another rescue dog because we had young grandchildren. So there are lots of difficulties in getting a rescue dog as well. So
OK, well, Debbie, we might come back to the question of rescue dogs in a second, but specifically, Jennifer, on the point about Crufts, what is it you specifically object to? Is there any way Crufts could happen in a way you wouldn't find objectionable?
Well, Crufts really is a celebration of everything that is wrong with the dog breeding industry, and it supports churning out dogs to look a specific way at the expense of their health. And both Crufts and the Kennel Club actively encourage people to use these extreme breeding practices and inbreeding animals who are closely related in order to achieve these arbitrary breed standards. So the fact that dogs are being bred deformed with disabilities to enter some, archaic Victorian era beauty pageant, it is cruel and it's also ridiculous.
Just so people are clear where Peter's coming from on this, I mean, is it you just want to circumscribe some of what happens at, say, Crufts? Or are you looking, will some people listen to what you say and think, that's the thin end of the wedge? I know what Peter are all about. They want to sever the connection between people and pet animals, and millions of people, I was going to use the word rely, I think it's probably a fair word, rely on dogs for company. Would you stop them having pet dogs?
No, the point here is that the winners at Crufts are really the genetic losers. And because these animals are bred to have such exaggerated features, of course, we're seeing the pugs with the flat faces, they can't breathe properly. We're seeing Cavalier King Charles Spaniels with brains that are too big to fit properly in their skulls. And if you look at this year's winner, the flat-coated retriever, 50% of those dogs die from cancer. And that's because of human interference, manipulating genetics, not allowing these dogs to breed out with their breed. And that's what's causing these dogs to be inherently ill. And the happiest dogs and the healthiest dogs are mutts. And that's why Peter would encourage people to adopt from a shelter if they were thinking of bringing a dog into their home.
Debbie Matthews, do you accept there is perhaps a way to reform Crufts in a way that makes everyone happy?
I think there has been a lot of work done. There was a programme a few years ago which the BBC did with a big expose on the Kennel Club. And I think they've changed a lot. Although a couple of years ago, I remember there was a German Shepherd that was shown. And that's one breed that I really love. And to show the sloping legs and the deformed legs was absolutely horrific. And again, they got pulled up on that and changes have been made. And I think that, if anything, Crufts highlights the problems and it makes them make the changes.
Debbie Matthews and Jennifer White, thanks both for your views. There have been lots of views coming in on this. Let me just share a couple of them with you now as we come up to 5. Steve says, I went to Crufts yesterday for the first time. I didn't see anything horrific, cruel or upsetting myself. Dan says, I enjoy watching Crufts every year. It has a glorious international reputation and many overseas contestants and winners as well. We're getting the views of Scarlett Maguire alongside me shortly, but first, it's 5 o'clock. Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5, Ukraine war stories. I'll ask my GB News colleague Alistair Stewart, who anchored coverage for ITN during the First Gulf War, how to cover a conflict. Also, they came, they postured, they posted selfies on Instagram. As the Baftas are accused of breaking new ground when it comes to pomposity, we'll ask why anybody should feel that the movie awards season ought to be taken seriously. And from Walker's crisps to walking in space, how Leicester has become the centre of the booming British space industry. Alongside me throughout the next hour, the commentator Scarlett Maguire. But first, the headlines with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. The mayor of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, says Russian forces are firing relentlessly, and the capital, Kyiv, is also being bombarded. The UN has confirmed more than 600 civilians have been killed during the conflict, including 46 children. Peace talks between the two countries have been postponed until tomorrow. Addressing the Council of Europe, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal called for Russia's expulsion from the human rights group.
We demand that a decision is approved to immediately oust Russia from the Council of Europe. The ones who definitely support this non-provoked and unjustified aggression cannot stay in the single European family where human life is the highest value.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky released a statement saying Russia's been planning the invasion for some time.
But we have no right to relax. The Russian state has been preparing for this war for tens of years. They have built up huge military resources for the sake of evil, in order to uproot the neighbours, in order to destroy Ukraine, Europe as we know it and value.
Russia has denied claims it asked China for military equipment to use in its invasion of Ukraine. It says a number of unnamed US officials told multiple news organisations that Moscow has sought assistance from Beijing. The Chinese embassy in the US says it wasn't aware of the request. Meanwhile, the US National Security Advisor has warned China it would face consequences if it helped Russia. Director of the China Institute at SOAS University, Professor Steve Sang, told GB News the Chinese president is likely to prioritise his political ambitions over helping Russia.
And the most important and basic interest of China for 2022 is for Xi Jinping to succeed himself into a third term of office. And he wouldn't want to take risk of attracting American secondary sanctions. So it is not because of American persuasion. It is because of domestic and personal political calculations.
The government has announced more details of a scheme beginning today, allowing people in the UK to offer spare rooms to Ukrainians fleeing the conflict. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has told MPs under the Homes for Ukraine initiative, refugees will be able to access benefits and healthcare and live and work in the UK for up to 3 years. Labour's calling it a DIY asylum scheme and says it's not fit for purpose. Mr Gove says the UK has a long history of taking in those in need. Police have entered the mansion of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska after protesters were seen inside earlier today. At least 11 police vehicles are on the scene in central London, along with dozens of officers. Mr Deripaska is one of the 7 Russian oligarchs who was sanctioned last week by the government. He has business empires, wealth and connections closely associated with the Kremlin. Downing Street says Chelsea football fans must stop chanting Roman Abramovich's name at matches. Football fans again expressed support for the Russian owner of the club during their home match against Newcastle. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says it is completely inappropriate behaviour. Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the British government over his links to President Putin. Boris Johnson says the UK will supply Ukraine with more than 500 portable generators. It follows a request by the country's President Zelensky. The devices will provide energy for essential services, including at hospitals and shelters, and will power 20,000 homes. Australia and the Netherlands have launched joint legal action against Russia over the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 8 years ago. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said Moscow was responsible under international law for the attack, which resulted in the deaths of 298 passengers. The Dutch government said in a statement to the UN Security Council it had also been informed of the legal action. The Queen has praised the Commonwealth as a force for good during what she refers to as testing times, as she misses the annual Commonwealth service. Prince Charles represented her at Westminster Abbey. Other senior royals and politicians also attended. In her message to the organisation of 54 countries, she says the family of nations continues to be a point of cooperation and friendship. The monarch also repeated the lifelong commitment she made in 1947 to devote her life in service. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
6 minutes past 5. Here's a question. Is China trying to send weapons to help the Russians defeat the Ukrainian army? The Americans say that is exactly what's being attempted. Meanwhile, there have been more talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians today. They were conducted on Zoom, not in person. And the West was waking up to what a missile strike close to the Polish border might mean. So lots of different strands to this story. Let's turn some of them over, all those developments, with Major General Tim Cross, a regular contributor here. General Cross, thanks so much for joining us again. On the China question, we were talking a few moments ago to a former defence correspondent of great standing who was making the point that there is mutiny in the air in the Russian ranks and they may be running low on equipment.
Yeah, I've been picking up various comments about that too, ranging from officers, leaving their soldiers to look after themselves, to deeper things happening. I think the Russians definitely do buy stuff from China. One of the issues in terms of the logistics that people have quoted and talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks is that a lot of the tyres on the soft-skin vehicles have been basically breaking up in the cold. They're old, they were cheap, very cheap. So there's a procurement process from Russia which does involve buying stuff from China. I would be very surprised if China was actually selling weapons as opposed to, those sorts of items, to be honest. Because I agree with what Steve Sang was just saying, who I know a little bit, that China is going to be tackling this very carefully. It really will not want to find itself in a position where the West starts laying sanctions against them.
Tim, just from a perspective of somebody who worked in logistics procurement, I mean, aside from the obvious horror, the human horror stories are emerging from Ukraine. I mean, you must approach this with a certain curious detachment, watching how people who don't plan well get unstuck.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's surprising in a way that the Russians are running into the sort of trouble that they are. They're a very big army and they will have had a big procurement process and they'll have had lots of stocks of materiel in the round. And by material, I mean food, fuel, weapons, ammunition, and so on. So again, in a way, I find it difficult to understand or agree with that they might be turning to China for procurement. But procurement is a really difficult business. The British government are constantly criticised by the National Audit Office and others for our procurement of British defence systems, ranging from aeroplanes to tanks, and to Ajax is the latest one, an armoured personnel vehicle. So procurement as a whole is a difficult issue to get right. And if you don't have a lot of in-place stocks, then when you start running into trouble, and if you're relying on a just-in-time type delivery system for your support chain, then of course you run into problems because building and delivering weapons, complex weapon systems, and by that I include, for example, guided weapons, air-launched and ground-launched guided weapons, which are expensive and take a long time to put together, then you could run into trouble pretty quickly. So if the Russians didn't have a lot of just-in-case type stocks, as opposed to relying on just-in-time delivery systems from their procurement processes, it's not surprising they're running into trouble.
Yeah. And when we talk about running into trouble, Robert Fox in the last hour was expressing astonishment, really, with the tactics being pursued by Russian armour without infantry support, which is a no-no.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I know Robert very well, and he's always pretty well on the mark. Yeah, I mean, traditionally, in any military engagement, you don't have armour on its own, and you preferably don't have infantry on its own, even in urban fighting. So some of their tactics are, again, very difficult to understand. I think a lot of it comes back to what we've talked about a number of times, which is their expectation of how this campaign would go. And they've been very slow to respond to the fact that it isn't going the way they hoped. And therefore, their people on the ground are probably mystified to some degree what's going on. Their commanders, I think, have been struggling. And we know that apparently 3 major generals, my rank equivalent, have been killed, probably going forward as divisional commanders to try and put some maintain the momentum of the advance and so on. So they are clearly in trouble, and Robert's right. Their tactics are difficult to understand. I mean, frankly, they're pretty abysmal on the face of it, but it's difficult to know that for sure if you're not actually on the ground with them.
Tim Cross, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's turn to Scarlett Maguire, who's alongside me here. I was just mindful of what Tim Cross was saying at the end there about the fact we just don't have the full picture of what's happening. There will be books written about this, from military history books,
Yes,
won't they, in years to come, and we'll get a more rounded picture of what's happening now. At the moment, we are seeing through a glass darkly, aren't we?
We are, but also what is so surprising is the outcomes. I mean, it's. I don't know enough about military to say whether the tanks are right. What I do know is that I expected enormous, powerful Russia to have taken over Ukraine, and their army seems to be quite a lot made up of men of varying ages, actually, with varying capabilities. I mean, they have an army, and then they have all these people. I mean, yes, and one thought at the beginning, yes, their hearts are there, but I mean, nothing's happened. I mean, it's very, very strange.
Scott, can I just talk about something we were discussing during the news bulletin? And the news bulletin had a story about what was happening at Chelsea and the fans who were singing, chanting the name of Roman Abramovich, and you and I turned to each other and said, I said to you, it's objectionable. It's really objectionable. I wish they wouldn't do it. But are we going to stop people expressing vile opinions?
No, I think we can't. I mean, I just think that if the Chelsea fans, and I think a lot of other fans would say it says a lot about Chelsea, this is what has been said to me, think that Roman Abramovich is their hero. And I've heard this from perfectly reasonable people who are Chelsea fans. I mean, this isn't just bonkers people. Then of course they have a right to say it. I mean, I think it actually doesn't do Chelsea any good to have. I mean, because on Saturday, I mean, there was a banner supporting Roman Abramovich, right, as well as singing from the stand. So I mean, the Chelsea fans are quite cross because, of course, what really matters is football is more important than life or death, and what really matters is whether Chelsea win.
As Bill Shankly said.
Yes, it was Bill Shankly.
Scott, but no, thanks very much. Now, the first Ukrainian refugees to be accommodated in the UK under a new government scheme are expected to arrive by the end of this week. You'll have heard in the last hour, around about this time actually, the Housing Secretary Michael Gove making that announcement in the Commons. He explained the sponsorship programme allowing people in the UK to offer a spare room to Ukrainians escaping the war in return for, amongst other things, £350 tax-free per month. He says the scheme will make all the difference for refugees without family here in the UK.
The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. The scheme will be open to all Ukrainian nationals and residents. They will be able to live and work in the United Kingdom for up to 3 years. They will have full and unrestricted access to benefits, healthcare, employment, and other support.
That was Michael Gove. He got a lot of flack, actually, from his opposite number, Lisa Nandy, as he made that announcement. She said it was presentation-led, it was a press release without a plan, and much more besides. Let's turn to Igor Lanovenko, whose charity Oporo is helping Ukrainian refugees unite with family that they may have in this country. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What's the job that you're doing?
So what we started was a private charity, private endeavour a couple of weeks ago to really help people that are affected and on the way to the UK. And this was originally revolving around support for visa applications under the family scheme, which were quite complicated and had their own issues. So we were helping people as they were making their way through Europe, through different countries, waiting for those visa appointments, waiting for biometrics, helping them with accommodation information and so on. But we quickly wanted to turn our attention to the new sponsorship scheme. In anticipation of that, a few days ago, we launched our own website to register people's interests. And I think over the last 36 hours, we've had over 400 applications already. So we've been keenly awaiting this additional information.
That's 400 on your website?
Just on our website alone.
This is really interesting, because I mean, we had Michael Gove saying there is no cap, there is no limit, there is no upper ceiling on the numbers of Ukrainians who could apply for this sponsorship accommodation system. And it is quite a radical departure in some respects, isn't it? Here's the state saying to individual householders, over to you, if you want to help, go on, have a go.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is it will likely fall to individuals and organisations and charities like ours to actually implement this scheme and make it a success. And I think the team, our team that we're working this for a few days, are slightly underwhelmed by the latest announcement. It's quite bare bones FAQs. the link wasn't quite working yet when I was still checking, when I was waiting for you. And we're hoping to see more detail. They've promised more information packs, more sponsor support, but there's still a lot of questions that are.
We know politicians struggle with delivery. Sky
about this for so long, and finally we have to release than anything else. You know, I mean, you get it right, because these people are dead.
I think it was similar with the family visa scheme.
Somebody comes, mother, child, they stage host. It has nefarious purposes. It takes time.
Indeed, and that's one of our concerns. And sides very carefully, right, and need to explain to people what check sides, and that's one of the questions. Who's coming, who's eligible, and safeguarding both sides is very important, right? So both the sponsors and those looking for sponsorship, it is very important that we, provide them with enough guidance, support, and checks, and that's something the government can do.
Impossible question to answer. I'm going to ask you anyway. What numbers should Britain brace for from Ukraine? How many people might come?
Yeah, I'm not going to hazard a guess, but if
hundreds of thousands.
I listen. What we're seeing in countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, right? There is hundreds of thousands of people, more than over 2 million people have fled. And I think we need to appreciate that these people have most of them have already made their way into safety. And let's not forget that this scheme still requires people to have a visa before they can come. And there are no embassies left, in Ukraine.
You can do it online now.
So you can do it online if you have a biometric passport, right? There's a few restrictions there. So there's a few details that we're waiting to see, and that's why it's really important to get that information. But given that, this needs to be people who've already escaped, who are based already in a country, maybe Poland, already sought some shelter. So, there's a lot of factors to consider.
I wonder how many Ukrainians have got biometric passports. Is it
quite a few?
Oh, right, okay.
Quite a few,
but remember, they had to remember to find it before they fled. I mean, she says as somebody who has no idea what her passport is at the moment.
Igor Lanovenko, appreciate your work and appreciate you coming in. Thanks very much.
Thank you
for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this year, the Baftas were held in person, in the flesh, for the first time since the start of the COVID pandemic. While the ceremony was received fairly well by audiences, some of the talk today, the virtue signalling on show. Some of the recipients, some of them made statements of solidarity with Ukraine. You'd expect that, wouldn't you, as they spoke to the press and accepted their awards. But there was a lot more going on besides. Let's turn to my fellow GB News presenter, Dan Wootton, who had an excoriating column, as it often is, Dan, in the Daily Mail. I think there'll be some people saying, oh, love is at an awards ceremony, posturing and being pompous, low-hanging fruit.
I think there was something this year, Colin, in the midst of bombs raining down on Ukraine, the biggest cost of living crisis in a generation, that just made this ceremony feel particularly gauche and out of touch. And then you look at the fact that the award for Best Film went to a movie that I think is probably the most pointless and nonsensical ever made. We had speech after speech criticizing the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, talking about diversity and all of the things that filmmakers seem to care more about than the actual content of the movies, plus a whole host of very unfunny and woke gags by the host of the ceremony, Rebel Wilson. And I just got pretty angry about it, Colin, if I'm honest.
And angry too about the appearance of a cake presented by a caterer. We're looking at some of the celebs laughing along there. The cake presented by a mask-wearing caterer who seemed to be wearing the only mask in the auditorium. Now, I mean, that may have been her choice, but optically it looked very odd. Oh, we are looking at there's the picture. And apologies for people listening on the radio.
To me, Colin, this was the most despicable form of COVID theatre. You have the woman wheeling out, by the way, a vegan cake of Benedict Cumberbatch, of course, and she's surrounded by all of the A-listers, the host, Rebel Wilson, Emma Watson from Harry Potter, Benedict himself, all of them, all the film executives, completely unmuzzled. But this poor hapless staff member, of course, has half her face covered up. Now, you might say that was her choice, but I find it very hard to believe, given there has been a long line of these award ceremonies from the Met Gala in the US to the Brit Awards, where you've seen the staff with their faces completely covered up and the celebrities able to roam free. And I just think we need to call an end to this COVID theatre now, and it was very wrong.
Dan, I'm sure you can be talking about it on your show this evening. Looking forward to that. But for now, thanks very much indeed. Dan Wootton there. Scarlett Maguire, just time for a quick one and a reflection on the Baftas with you. Dan felt it was a farrago.
I read his column this morning. I didn't watch the Baftas. I have to say, like him, I had a choice and I decided not to.
And people increasingly don't watch these awards ceremonies.
Yeah, I mean that's and it's not because of all his problems with wokeness and everything. I mean, they're just going out of fashion, which is fine. But I mean, for him to get into a complete fuss about the movie that won because he doesn't like it seems to me. I mean, and then he says, "Oh, and the BBC shouldn't show it." But God forbid that I'd say to him that Channel 4 shouldn't show Crufts. I mean, this. I thought.
There's a difference.
There isn't really. There isn't really.
Well, I'll make the point. There's a difference in the sense that if it's the BBC who are putting it on and I don't like it, I don't get to do anything about it in terms of withholding my custom because I'm obliged to pay the licence fee. With Channel 4, I'm under no such legal obligation on pain of a criminal penalty.
But we know what we're really talking about. I did read Dan's column and he said all these terrible jokes that Rebel Wilson told, and I thought they were actually quite funny. I mean, I think you're right. It's low-hanging fruit. He made a fuss about nothing. He sort of says that what's so terrible is that James Bond didn't win any awards, and actually it's like saying there shouldn't be a Booker Prize, for good literature, and actually we should have Ken Follett and Stephen King and everything. You've got both. I mean, the BAFTA is about.
I wish I'd known you were going to be quite so rude about his column. I'd have kept him on. We'd have a good old-fashioned ding-dong.
I wish
Might not be
you
too
had.
late. Scarlett, thanks very much. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV online and on digital radio. After the break, Jeremy Hunt said the UK needs to expand defence spending to American levels. We'll be discussing that with Colonel Hamish de Bretton Gordon. We'll be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. 26 minutes past 5. Taxes are going up, you know that. Prices are rocketing, you know that too. The unpaid bills of COVID are coming home to roost. Gas bills, the cost of diesel, well, let's not even go there. But there are calls to spend taxpayers' cash on something where, if anything, the government was planning to make savings, big savings, in fact, almost a year to the day since the Defence Secretary said he planned to cut the size of the British Army to its smallest level since the days of the Napoleonic Wars. But after the invasion of Ukraine, does all that change? Jeremy Hunt, former Foreign Secretary, we remember him as former Health Secretary, but he was also former Foreign Secretary, wrote at the weekend that the UK needs to expand defence spending to American levels. Australia has just said it will increase spending on its armed forces by a third. Joining me now, Mr. Breton Gordon, former Commander, UK Chemical Biological Defence Forces. Welcome to you. It's one thing to aspire to increasing your military, it's quite another to pay for it.
Well, absolutely. But I think a lot of things have really changed over the last few years that will change our assessment. And you need a military that is protects you against the threats out there. And for the last 10 years or so, we focused very much on the counter-terror threat, counter-ISIS, counter-Al-Qaeda, and the sort of things we were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq. And dare I say, the sort of the Eastern threat, the Russian, the Chinese threat, you know, certainly the Russian threat since the end of the Cold War, we've pretty much put to one side and have not really bothered about it. So quite rightly, Ukraine is bringing that very much back into focus. And actually, the Ukraine army is 3 times the size of the British Army now, which, you know, thankfully is we're now seeing is a really good thing. And I think we've invested very much in sort of what I call ones and noughts, high tech, wizardry, cyber, where actually for the sort of fight we're seeing in Ukraine, where Russia has thousands of tanks, which you know, don't really have any impact from the sort of cyber world, just keep on grinding through, then we need to have a balanced defence force. And I think that's perhaps what Jeremy Hunt's looking at. And when the Germans are massively increasing their defence spending, who traditionally have been, you know, very anti to that, I think it's something that we need to take a look at. And also the various capabilities. You know, in my area, my capabilities very much on the chemical and biological and nuclear side. You know, we've really pared that down. But actually, you know, this is probably some of the greatest threats that certainly people in Ukraine could face over the next few weeks and months.
Hamish, to paraphrase part of what you're saying there, sort of a return to old-fashioned defence spending, the heavy armour, etc. I just wonder whether, honestly, you think there is the appetite out there now from young British men and women to serve in the way they once did, in the numbers they once did, given the pay and conditions that's involved?
Well, I don't think it's a binary thing, and I'm certainly not saying we should invest in thousands of tanks. Certainly not. I think there is a what we call a level of mass that you go below and then you cease to be effective. And I think that's what Jeremy Hunt and a lot of others, and I'm sure a lot of other old soldiers like myself are talking about, the ability to get a reasonable sized force on the ground with a variety of capabilities, be it armour, but also the high-tech stuff. As far as, you know, the young men and women in this country wanting to serve, I think I'm always surprised how brilliant our young men and women are who serve in the military these days. And actually, I think Ukraine has brought things back into focus. So I would hope that our young men and women will serve as their foremothers and fathers did so valiantly throughout the ages. I don't think that's an issue. I think we've got to make sure that we get the right balance of force and spend our money wisely. But it's all about threat. And at the moment, the threat would suggest that we might be slightly undercooked militarily, and we should make sure that we rebalance that. And of course, the other thing is somebody like Putin, who is a bully. I think there are two things that are driving him. First of all, he thinks that the West is weak and will do nothing. And, we're all talking about chemical and biological attack at the moment. Putin saw that we did nothing when Assad killed 1,500 people in Syria in 2013 with chemical weapons. And, he is not that worried to use them now because he thinks a similar outcome would happen. And we must make absolutely certain that he changes his view on that.
Hey, Mr. Brenton Gordon, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Scarlett Maguire alongside me here to reflect on that aspect of spending. Jeremy Hunt talks about 4% of GDP going on defence spending. Admiral Lord West, former Labour minister, but also a former senior military figure, talks about 3%. The Aussies have gone all in for a third increase. Where's it going to come from, all this money?
Well, I think this is where's it going to come from, and what are we really trying to do with it? If we had more soldiers, we wouldn't be sending them to Ukraine, right? I mean, that's we don't want to send anybody to Ukraine because of NATO. Are we actually saying we need more soldiers to defend this island in case Putin invades? I mean,
we're talking about stationing them in Poland and Estonia and Romania and Hungary.
But actually, when you talk about Germany, I mean, Germany underspent massively. I mean, obviously,
partly because we picked up the slack for decades. We had 50,000 soldiers.
No, I know, and also
Germany.
because of the Second World War, is that the Germans were very, very anti it. But it's like when we talk about what would happen if Putin used chemical weapons. Well, what would happen in Ukraine? I mean, is he saying that then we should pile in and then we have World War III? I mean, what I think is that we need a strategy first. And my slight problem with the military is they love shiny things and spending a lot of money.
Do you know
National Audit Office.
Perhaps hitherto I would have agreed with you. The last few years, and in particular the last fortnight, I fundamentally disagree with you. I think there's been a correlation between people who've actually seen active service. You might feel this is a cliche. The people who've actually fought. And they're the ones who are coming off sounding pacifist. And it's the people traditionally you might have thought were quite inclined towards pacifism who are saying, there will be no surrender in Ukraine, encouraging other people to fight and die on their behalf for principles about autonomy and sovereignty. Well, I'll leave that hanging, shall I, Scarlett? As we move on.
She says there's nothing else to answer.
Thanks very much. More from Scarlett Maguire, and maybe even a bit more from me in a wee while. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we're going to be joined by my fellow GB News presenter, Alistair Stewart, to discuss the media's role in the reporting of the war in Ukraine. But first, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's at 5:34. Here are the top stories in the GB newsroom. EU member states have approved a fourth round of sanctions against Russian oligarchs and entities as Ukrainian cities continue to be bombarded. The UN has confirmed more than 600 civilians, including 46 children, have been killed during the conflict. Peace talks between the two countries have been postponed until tomorrow. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal is now urging human rights body, the Council of Europe, to expel Russia.
We demand that a decision is approved to immediately oust Russia from the Council of Europe. The ones who definitely support this non-provoked and unjustified aggression cannot stay in the single European family where human life is the highest value.
In other news, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been denied permission to appeal against the High Court's decision to extradite him to the United States. The Supreme Court says his bid was refused because it did not raise an arguable point of law. The 50-year-old is wanted in America over an alleged conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defence information. All COVID travel restrictions will end at 4 a.m. on Friday. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says passenger locator forms and tests for all UK arrivals will be stood down. The government says the changes are possible due to the success of the vaccine rollout. The Queen has praised the Commonwealth as a force for good during what she described as testing times in a message sent to the annual service. Prince Charles represented her at Westminster Abbey. Other senior royals and politicians also attended. The monarch also repeated the lifelong commitment she made in 1947 to devote her life to service. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Brazier in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, this year marks it is the 40th anniversary, isn't it, of the Falklands War. It was the last major conflict involving a European country before the arrival of 24-hour rolling news. And the way it was reported then would not happen anymore. Obviously, I don't just mean the technology, which has turned thousands of ordinary people with smartphones into war correspondents, but the terminology and the way we phrase things too. When the Falklands War happened, the BBC, for instance, was criticised for its journalistic detachment, referring to British forces and Argentinian forces, not us and them or anything like that. Emotive descriptions were avoided, bald statements and verifiable facts very much encouraged. Is that still true? Something else has changed. War in Ukraine is now fought alongside the culture wars, which insist that many aspects of life and death must now be viewed through the prism of identity politics. So, for instance, we've heard journalists in America and Britain complain that the invasion and subsequent refugee crisis has been given disproportionate coverage by dint of the fact that those fleeing Russian bombs are white. Well, the conflict which broke the mould when it comes to televised conflict was the first Gulf War in 1991. My GB News colleague Alistair Stewart was there for ITN, and Alistair joins me now. Alistair, thanks ever so much for your time. What's different now from before?
Well, brilliant start, Colin, and lovely to talk to you. I was a young whippersnapper at the Ministry of Defence in the Falklands War, listening to Ian MacDonald speak very slowly, while mutual friends like Jeremy Hands and Mike Nicholson were out in the Falklands. The thing that happened after that and before we were dispatched to the Gulf was that David Nicholas and his, who was the boss at ITN, and his opposite number at the BBC, said to Sandy Woodward, who was the naval commander down there, and John Fieldhouse, who was the chief of defence staff, we can never do it again like that, where you sit on us for 24 hours, you police us, and we can't do anything off our own bats. By the time of the Gulf War, We had embedded reporters like Martin Bell and Paul Davis. We had MOD minders, but they were much more liberal and they trusted us. And that was won by the greats like Sir David Nicholas. So in that sense, it's very, very different.
Is with me, and she's nodding along vigorously at a lot of what she said. I think she's got something to add.
Well, I mean, actually, in the Falklands, they did embed the reporters, but you are absolutely right. They then wouldn't let them report without censorship. So the embedding happened, and one of the problems of embedding is that, I mean, you have to have a lot of different reporters to get a proper sense of it, because otherwise they do get very, very involved with the troops.
There was a subtle difference, and great to see you, Scarlett, by the way. Been a long time.
I know.
I think it was the great Sir Max Hastings who liberated Port Stanley on his own, going on a freelance. There was a degree of embedding, but only when it suited the Ministry of Defence. Whereas Paul and Martin saw the battle raging, good, bad, desert rats, whether it was successful or not. It was then that the editing picked in. But let me tell you something else, both of you, and it was a fascinating example of freelancing in the Gulf War that Colin was kind enough to remind folk I was covering. And that was Peter Sharp, who is a name that may ring bells for both of you, a brilliant, brilliant young reporter, left us and went on to Sky and to great achievements. He was out in the desert when Schwarzkopf swung far out to the west to come scourging back in a almost Roman Empire way. And we filmed it because Sharpie was out freelancing. We went to the MOD and said, we've got this, we want to run it tonight. Sue Tinson, which was always a complete shocker for the Saudis. Our boss in the field was a woman, but there you go. That's a nod to your other part of the intro, Colin. The MOD guy said, well, you can run it if you want, but more people will die because we'll delay the attack. We can't go if it's being aired around the world by you guys. So at the highest level at ITN, the decision was made to sit on it. We sat on it for 24 hours. We only ran it when Schwarzkopf was rolling, and therefore no additional life was lost at our expense. Dodgy journalistic decision. I stand by it absolutely, then and now.
I wonder if there's another change, Alistair, and it's not necessarily new, this idea that combatants one side will decide that they're not getting a fair hearing from the media, and therefore it's in their interests to stop the war being covered. I mean, we had my old colleague and friend Stuart Ramsey, the Sky News correspondent, who was shot and injured recently by, we presume, Russian forces. But you can think back to, sorry, this is a bit of a trip down memory lane, but I can think to someone like David Chater when he was at ITN in the Balkans. Yeah. He was shot whilst practicing a piece to camera in a church by a Serbian sniper because they decided they did not want the story told by pesky journalists. And that does seem to be happening this time too.
I think it is, and another name again familiar to all of us is the great Peter Sissons, and that was in an African civil war when he was shot and rescued by his cameraman in a pushchair, got out with his film, and we still ran the story. The greater example I would give would be the feeling that the BBC, for the safety of their own people, had to shut down the Moscow operation because they were fearful, and Moscow shut off Facebook. There is a real squeeze on that stuff. But the three of us and anybody else who cares about this great trade of ours listening, I suspect will share that fear. And that is the caveats that you have to apply to anything that isn't coming from an established media organisation, be it ourselves at GB News, Sky, the BBC or ITN. Dismiss this mainstream media nonsense, complete rubbish at this juncture. It is whether it comes from people who have checked and double-checked on the sources, that we are not being played as we were several times in the Syrian war, and we were played several times in conflicts over the years. That's what you pay your money for. And I take your point, Colin, you can switch off Channel 4, but you're stuck with paying your licence fee. That's a different argument. I would say to anybody listening to this conversation, find the men and women that you really trust to tell you the truth. And at the very top of my list, and this may cost me dear, but I'll say it anyway, I would listen to Lise Doucette on the BBC and James Mates on ITN almost before I'd listen to anybody else. Because not only are they accurate, reliable, balanced, impartial reporters, they've done their homework. And that's the absolute crucial thing. Anyone like us knows that this conflict in Ukraine started in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell, which I covered, and that is absolutely part of it. Putin wants back to the glory days of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, Andropov, all those funny old crusty guys that killed anyone who disagreed with them and just kept the empire gripped tight. That's what he wants back. And you need to know that to understand why Ukraine matters and why he's doing it, how he's doing it.
Alison, we're almost out of time, but I wonder, I was really surprised a fortnight ago. I tweeted something about the necessity ultimately of having peace talks, and the heavens crashed in around my ears because I was countenancing the idea, or at least asking the question whether eventually you've got to cut a deal with this vile dictator if you're in the interests, if your interests are in reducing the body count ultimately. And I just thought, gosh, it feels like now you've got to take a side. The idea that you can stand apart with this sort of third-party journalistic detachment looking down on the battlefield, that feels like it's gone. You've got to take a side.
I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong in taking a side, particularly if men and women in your own colours are risking their lives in our name, in the Queen's name, however you want to dress it up. But I think a number of people have written pieces, funnily enough, Max Hastings, for the second time in this conversation, a brilliant piece recently in the Telegraph saying, all wars end in negotiations. You don't always hear what those negotiations are. And there are some reporters out there risking their necks for us, I know, who know more what the Yalta conference was about, let alone the Versailles Treaty and all of the rest of it. You've really got to know your homework. And the best piece last night, I thought, on the 10 o'clock news was from James Mates, who hadn't found it out in Ukraine, but he'd got copy from London about what the FT were going on with China intervening. Russia had allegedly asked China for weaponry. China was holding back, setting down conditions for it. There will be a deal. It won't necessarily be done in Kyiv or in Moscow. It may well be done in Washington, Beijing, and London.
Yeah, there are quite a few people, well-informed people, who feel that ultimately this is a war that could be ended by Xi Jinping if nobody else. Alison Stewart, so good to talk to you. Thanks for that wonderful breadth of experience and the perspective that you've been able to offer us this afternoon. Thanks ever so much.
It's so kind of you to have.
Well, for the first time in a decade, the annual Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey has taken place without Her Majesty the Queen in attendance. The 95-year-old's decision to pull out of the event is not believed to be related to illness, but in a statement released earlier, she stressed her commitment to continue to serve. Well, joining me now, the former royal correspondent at The Sun, that is Charles Ray. Charlie Ray, thanks for joining us, appreciate it. She's getting older.
Yes, cheers. Unfortunately, it's something that happens to all of us. We're all getting older. You just had Alistair on, and he mentioned the Falklands and the Ministry of Defence, and I was there with him at that time. But yes, we're actually all getting older, and that is the huge problem when it comes to the Queen's mobility. There's no new health scare at the moment. I mean, she's suffered COVID, and she's made it quite clear that she's having trouble walking. She's not walking the dogs anymore. And they took the decision to miss the Commonwealth service today because it meant travelling from Windsor, about 30 miles into London, and there was a church service for about an hour. Now, the same thing is going to happen when she is due to attend the memorial service for her late husband on March the 29th. Same journey, same church, but she's pacing herself. Royal aides are looking at her diary and they're taking out anything that would be regarded as too strenuous for her. We're not going to see the Queen doing investitures anymore at all. That's going to be the job being done by the Prince of Wales, Prince William, and the Princess Royal. So anything like that involve standing for a while, are not going to happen. She's still going to continue with looking at the government boxes. She's still going to have her audiences with the Prime Minister. So she'll still be having meetings with various people, some of them face-to-face, others on Zoom. So we have to look after the Queen. It's often said, this phrase, a national treasure, and she really is the national treasure. We have to look after her for as long as we can.
Charles, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks ever so much. Scarlett Maguire is alongside me. Charles Ray making the point there that the Queen no longer walks her dogs. She was still riding her horse into her early 90s. One of the saddening aspects to this, I mean, I know, people get older, is that the thing she clearly, we assume, derived an enormous amount of pleasure from her animals, riding the horse, walking the dogs, do seem to be departing.
Yeah, I remember my dad saying that what nobody tells you when you get old is your health just falls off a cliff. And obviously, she was incredibly fit, and actually walking the dogs and riding horses is very good. And it isn't the same anymore. It's quite amazing that a 95-year-old is still sorting out the papers, seeing people. But it is old age. I mean, it's the whole thing of if we're lucky, we'll get there.
Well, it's funny when you talk about off the cliff. Very often that affects people in their 80s, doesn't it? Not their 90s, as it appears to have happened with Her Majesty. Scarlett, we'll just reflect on this one last story, and it concerns Leicester. Leicester, already famous, amongst other things, as the burial place of Richard III. I'm reading this for the first time for its cheese.
Remember, okay. Leicester Red and Leicester
OK, yeah, that's right. And now it's about to become crisps, I seem to remember. It's about to become a major centre for space research in the UK. The British astronaut Tim Peake is to open a new £100 million space research hub in the city, which he hopes will train, educate and inspire future generations. Space Park Leicester will conduct research and education in space and Earth observation, it says here. Let's join the space expert Andy Lound to reflect on this. Andy, hi to you. It's all going off in Leicester.
Hi. It is, but Leicester University has a worldwide reputation for space science research anyway. I mean, it always has been. It's a very important facility. And of course, many years ago, the Centre for Public Awareness in Space Science was actually here in Birmingham, and I don't want to sound too loud here because I was doing it. But there was a decision taken where you would have centres of expertise around the country. Manchester got industry, museums and things like that. And Leicester got the National Space Science Centre, which is now just simply called the National Space Centre, where they can actually promote space science. Basically because the University of Leicester is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant at doing space research, and that's what it's an expert at. Now, what we're seeing here is this new space park being opened by Tim Peake is brilliant, because it really is going to congeal together scientists, researchers and industry together in a proper coordinated way. Now, Britain's got a long, strange reputation for this. I was rechecking my data here, and you may remember Chapman Pincher. 1959, he reported on the Macmillan government's Advisory Council on Scientific Research of what they were going to do with space. And it was interesting. And the people they put on the Advisory Council was a bird watcher, a botanist, an agriculturalist, but no physicist. And in fact, they decided they wouldn't do anything. And this is what's been frustrating in this country, because British universities have been some of the best space scientists, in the world, and engineers, and we've never really pushed it. And we had the British National Space Centre, which was a desperate effort, which failed. And now the UK Space Agency, which is better. But now this is going to be a true focus to do what Britain is really good at. I mean, remember, we've been offered so many opportunities. Richard Nixon offers us on a plate to do space research, which we turned down.
Yeah. Well, people were turning lots of things down from Tricky Dicky. It's worth bearing in mind that. Does it matter, Andy, that Leicester's not where launches will happen? Launches will happen in the far north of Scotland, maybe Cornwall, maybe Snowdonia. Does it matter there's a disconnect there?
No, there isn't, because you're going to have a centre where there has research being carried out. And obviously you've got to realise there's still going to be research done at UCL, Oxford, Cambridge, Durham and everywhere, Liverpool, Birmingham universities, which have been brilliant at doing space research as well. It's just they're going to have a specific type of focus here. And it's really an extension of what the University of Leicester is already doing. And University of Leicester have already, as I said before, I have to praise them because some of the research they've done there and some of the work they've done has been brilliant, connected with Beagle 2, of course, and things like that. So it's quite important. So no, there isn't a disconnect. If you look at, for instance, the United States as an example there, all the research isn't done at Cape Canaveral, which is the major principal launch facility. It's done around the country because you have to do that. So no, the disconnect is just a logistics thing. That's not a big deal at all. You've got to put a centre where there's expertise to coordinate it properly. And in a country like Britain, you need proper coordination. And that's really correct. In America, you've always had NASA to do it. So I think that's going to be really important.
OK, Andy Land, we've got to leave it there. We're almost out of time, but really appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Scarlett Maguire, I've got 20 seconds. I think Andy Land was suggesting if he'd moved to Leicester, he might be the head of Britain's space programme, was it?
Yes, actually, he's somebody who's made for TV. He's just so enthusiastic that he actually got over all my problems with it. And I thought, oh, OK.
He's very persuasive.
Very persuasive.
As you've been as well. Scarlett Maguire, thanks very much indeed. Just time to have a look at that poll we were posing today about Peter and Crufts. Can we get it up in time? Have a look online. It's there. More news coming up.
Hello there. Most of us will have a dry night tonight, but it could turn a little misty. Certainly across the south, a few fog patches are likely, and like this morning, it'll be a little chilly first thing as well. Surrounded by weather fronts, but they're not really causing too much in the way of rainfall. This one has been making for a wet day across western Scotland, and it is continuing to push northwards and will bring some showery rain to northeast Scotland through this evening before fizzling away. Another weather front then will bring some rain later in the night over the Western Isles and parts of Northern Ireland, but bar the odd shower across the southeast, most other places looking dry and fine. But it will turn misty in the south with a few fog patches, and it will turn chilly with a touch of frost in rural spots. So a fresh start to Tuesday, but generally quite a sunny one, certainly for England and Wales. There will be a few thick fog patches which could linger through the morning rush hour before